this week we're trying something a wee bit different. We obviously find ourselves, you know, in a nice new sort of studio surroundings. I think would be a fun nut, not to try and experiment with some of it. One of the things that I think we've spoke about recently was obviously the YouTube channel, which is, it's been there the whole time. It does all right in terms of our expectations, but we probably want to make merit with this type of environment at our disposal.
Aye, I need to stop putting BLM in like Labour and SNP and the tags, because I feel like on YouTube the left just gets totally fucking like mothballed to an extent.
Definitely.
And I'm always hitting all these sort of like social justice sort of tags in the hope that it sort of gets some attention, because that's what we spoke about. But I think in general I might just start putting in like Nazi.
we're basically trying to find ways to fuck with the algorithm, because we feel like it's kind of fucking with us a bit. But I mean, one of the things about it I've kind of hoped we could maybe experiment with, and that's what we're going to try today, is slightly shorter like episodes. I know we did some on like SoundCloud and stuff like that when we had specific sort of personal thoughts on individual things, but towards the sort of latest phase of the pandemic, I've spent a lot of time watching YouTube, just because I'm absolutely fucking scunnered with the telly. Like there's just nothing happening, and I've reverted to YouTube on my missus' recommendation, and I'm almost exclusively watching Red Dead and Football Manager videos, but it's just engaging. And I've noticed that there's that sort of 15 to 20 minute bracket on anything that happens on YouTube, and I was thinking that maybe like we'll take the shorts and maybe adapt them to like a more YouTube friendly format, and just take maybe like one topic that we would ordinarily, you know, when we have like episodes just for ourselves, we have like 3 or 4 topics that we talk about for an hour, but this is maybe a wee sort of 20-minute chat about, you know, just like sort of one specific thing. The
idea that I had for like my side, obviously like we contribute equally, and we'll try to come up with our own ideas for the 20 minutes. And the idea that I had for my 20 minutes was this sort of like therapy based, so I don't even know what to call it, like therapy hour or something like that. I don't even know, but that if you've got any questions
therapy corner.
Aye, therapy corner. Aye, if you've got any questions about stuff or anything that comes up, then you can like free to ask me. But the idea that I had was I would just tell you about over the course of like weeks, like the main issues, because as much as therapy and recovery and whatever way you want to frame it is an individual thing, I see the same shit.
Yeah,
you know, it is.
I will know as different as we think, are we?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And usually the way out is the same.
Yep.
The route might be very different. It might be, you know, like I've been very vocal about like the way that I was brought up and how that hasn't lent me to like positive mental health or like high self-esteem. And that might not be the same sort of root cause as somebody else, but you end up at this sort of point that's the same symptoms, you know, whatever it is, anxiety or sort of like depression, but the sort of path out's the exact same. The first thing that I wanted to talk about, because this is just huge, the demographic in my people that I see in therapy right now is like genuinely like 18 to 25.
Okay. I think they say, you know, the major threat groups for, you know, mental health are what, 18 to sort of 45. So you're talking about the sort of first half of that bracket.
For sure. And one of the big issues that comes up is in the social media era, how do you, well, they don't ask this question, but it becomes like a sort of point, a conflict. Like, how do you deal with trying to sort of fix yourself when the world's such a fucking shit show? Especially for young people, like, and this is, I feel like this is very much a modern issue in the sense that we've never had this type of sort of interconnectivity across the globe. So, I mean, how long would it have took for the world to see what's going on in Palestine? It would have probably took like secret videos or whatever else, and like, is that ever going to make it onto your TV screen? No, but we see it on the internet every day. So I feel like people have got like this hard to overcome sense of where they are in the world. And that then sort of brings discontent into their life. So I feel like they're two separate things, like where you sit in the world and then where you are in your life. And I've had ideas on this. Like, I remember reading a book and thinking, this just makes people functional in a dysfunctional world. Like, and so this is my own thinking.
Terminology. I was teaching you how to survive in a broken system.
Yeah, and so when you go down that sort of thought chain, it's like, well, why wouldn't you have anxiety? Like, if, why would an 18-year-old that's leaving school in 2021 feel worried about their future? And chronically so when, all you're getting
youth
told is,
unemployment right now is half the scale for a start. You know what I mean? Like,
and so this is like a really big issue, and especially when you're doing like what I'm doing, which is like cognitive behavioural therapy. You could just start at the start of like, what is the framework, the cognitive behavioural framework? The cognitive behavioural framework is basically that the things that happen outside and the things that happen about you do not cause your mental health problems, or don't cause like your anxiety or your feelings of discontent. What actually causes it is how you relate to it. But basically what he's saying is that if somebody walks past you and goes, look at the fucking state of you, mate, it isn't what the guy says to you that causes you to like feel upset about that situation.
It's
how you relate
feel
to
about it.
So if you've got supremely high self-esteem and you don't give a fuck about what people think about you, and somebody walks past and goes, look at the state of these shoes or look at the state of that jacket, the chances are you'll be like, well, I don't give a fuck. If you have low self-esteem and actually like when you put these shoes on, you were thinking, I wonder what people are going to think, you walk by somebody, look at the fucking state of that, you're probably going to feel anxious, you're probably going to get him, you're probably going to get changed.
Yeah.
So that's just like a sort of basic summary of the cognitive behavioural
we feel that
framework.
these things are potentially situational, that our anxiety or our depression is related to a specific event, but in actual fact, the event has very little to do with it. It's actually about how we feel within ourselves about any myriad of things that drives it. And
so like there's another thing that can impact that, obviously, like if you have like a shocking event happen and this is what PTSD is that the waves of that event, if you don't deal with it, can then start to infiltrate the rest of your life. And another way that to give you an example of that is you get mugged. So then you've got this sort of hyper alertness that you've got,
Definitely.
Like, I'm sure you remember like walking about the scheme and it would be like, who's that at every sort of twist and turn? Or who's these guys down there and who's that guy down there? It's a really
common thing. I think James Docherty spoke about it, where you almost have to sort of deprogram some of the people that he's worked with through his career, because they're always got one eye over their back or over their shoulder, because that's just how they've always had to exist.
Aye, absolutely. So if you then are, say that happens to you when you're 15 and you've got like sort of what would probably be described as some kind of like low level PTSD in your 20s or your 30s, you might end up agoraphobic. You don't want to leave the house. Now, if somebody could be like, well, why are you agoraphobic? And they'll be like, well, I just don't like going outside. And you're like, well, that's true. That's absolutely true. You don't like going outside, but it stems from this event. Yeah. And clearly how you relate to that event has impacted you to the point where you don't want to go out.
It's not the fact that you don't want to go outside, it's the fact that you are still no properly dealing with the trauma of the last time you went outside and were narrowly missed by a car or a train or whatever it happens to be.
So then your thoughts about that event then penetrate the behaviours that happen in your adulthood. So then it's about changing how you relate to that event, or the relativity that you're gaining that event. Like if you think that every time you're going to leave the house that somebody's going to mug you, then you don't want to leave the house. You never want to leave the house. So
makes perfect sense.
That's just a sort of basic way for me to break down like how the framework works.
On the subject of therapy, just yesterday I had like a really amazing chat with my parents for the first time about my history, and they've always danced around the edges and stuff like that. And I'm currently off sick. In the Jubemi episode, I was talking about having to deal with like a huge amount of anger, and that's kind of spilled out in the last week to the point where I don't think it's best for me to be, in the office, just as I don't end up doing or saying anything stupid. So I was. And you've said this to me a few times, well, that's a good cognitive sort of behavioural step that you're taking, because with the anxiety and the depression that I've experienced, I do find that working my way through them is far more effective than taking any pills because I've always felt that when I take antidepressants, I have 3 weeks, 4 weeks of hell, 2 weeks of like peace and quiet, and then my system just tapers off back to a place where it's almost like I'm not taking the pills, I'm not feeling that sort of continued sort of stability. So I've always found that trying to work my way through. So this week what I've been doing is like productive things. Like yesterday I went down and tuned in and set up my dad's new smart telly. He's like in his 70s, he doesn't know what apps are, doesn't know what usernames and passwords are. I went down, did all that for him, sort of thing. And when I was saying I was off, he kind of like has opened up in the past, but I've suffered with depression and stuff like that as well. And I feel bad for him because I think sometimes he feels guilty, like he's sort of passed it on to us or whatever. But I was having that conversation where, like, do you know, I'm at the point now where I need sustained, like, sort of long-term sort of therapy support to get out of the next sort of set of hurdles, because I'm at the limit of what I can do myself. The NHS isn't in any shape to help me, and you know, so on and so forth. And like, his attitude to it is like, aye, totally normal, like that's a great step, it's good that you've recognised that. But then talking about how his generation would have never sort of considered that as a sort of viable course of action for how they manage themselves. So I think like, in the respect that we're now starting it again, on last week's episode with Jabemi, he talked about the importance of it as well. I think it's something that we definitely need to start having like a wider conversation about. It is there, but I think people have got such a like Sopranos-esque like vision of like sitting in some swanky office and having like really intellectual conversations. And like my experience in the early years is that you're actually getting into some really heavy and sort of meaningful work a lot of the time. Yeah.
So what he does in The Sopranos is basically like Freudian-based psychotherapy, which is like an endless cycle of so within the first session, she sort of shines a light on the fact that this might be your mum. You know, he has a panic attack, and it's abandonment. It's the ducks.
Yep.
And he's got abandonment issues, and his dad got took to jail. Also, they go back and they look, and his dad preferred his sister over him. Yeah. So he's tried to emulate his dad. So he had like these sort of like Oedipus sort of things where he wanted to be his dad and hated his mum because his mum clearly like hated his dad, and like some sort of, and now his mum causes these sort of like things of panic. Now he gets that in a session. So why does he keep coming back? What good does it take? Actually, it enrages him at points where he's like, why am I coming here? For you to just sit and just this endless chatter about what's went on. Like, talk about awareness is king. Like, what do you do with that? And that's where I get really frustrated. So I started as a counsellor, and counselling's just, you know, basically like empathy and reflection of feelings. And if somebody says, you know, like I feel really stuck, and you go, you must be really frustrated, and being able to relate to that, like how it relates to you, and that's great. But the reason that I went down the CBT route was literally because I did it. For one, I went to cognitive behavioural therapy, and within about 4 months, I was like, I'm anxiety free for the first time in my life. I've got now, to qualify that, if I've like, you know, done something silly, said something to somebody, upset somebody, of course I wake up and I'll be like, I don't feel good, but I know what it's about, and I can actually go and fix that. But I've managed to like get rid of that sort of umbrella anxiety that used to just follow me about.
It's now merely a guide towards something that you need to resolve than an actual overarching sense.
That's the goal. Like, people think that when they come into a therapeutic thing, you know, there's a naivety of like, well, you're going to help me fix myself. And there's nothing wrong with you. Actually, like, anger's valid. Now, if you are finding that it's got to the point where it's dysfunctional, like your sadness, depression, anxiety, anger, trauma sort of responses go to the point where you can't actually live a normal life, then, you know, like you need to do something about it. But really, like the guy that I study under, he's got like an analogy that he puts to everybody where he's like, if I could give you a magic button and you could hit it and all these symptoms would just disappear like that, would you do it? And it's like 90% of the people in the first session will be like, please. And he's like, well, let's look at it a different angle before we do that.
There's definitely a time in my life where I would have pressed the button.
So he's like, before you do that, before we press the button, let's reframe everything. So on the sheet, you'll write all the emotions out. I'm feeling sad, down, incompetent, hopeless, whatever it might be. And then you'll write out what the thoughts are related to that. Like, oh, I'm a piece of shit. Like, I'm not good enough. Like, if, you know, like if I don't make this amount of money, that means I'm a failure. I can't, like, blah, blah, blah. And you'll be like, right, let's look at that and ask yourself 2 questions. What are you getting for living like that? And what does it say about you as a person? What you're doing is that you're saying to the person, look, I know you want to get rid of this. But in actual fact, this is a tool that you can use to your advantage. And if you get rid of it completely, so if we use the horrific example of sexual assault, right?
Okay.
Somebody comes to you and goes like, I've got these horrible feelings about, I was at fault, I'm weak. You say to them, well, hit the button and it goes away. I'll do that. But then you're leaving yourself open. You're leaving yourself vulnerable. Like, you then use that. So when you go through that process and you ask these simple questions, honestly, it is the hardest thing that anybody does in a session, because you're literally rewiring their brain right in front of you. They'll sit and they'll literally go, there's no advantage to me. It's like, well, let's just say it's, what we just said there, well, there's one big advantage. You're probably not likely to be assaulted again because your awareness of that is so high. Is that a good or a bad thing? Well, that's a good thing. So why do you want to hit the button on that? Well, I don't want to hit the button. It's like, right, well, now we're changing the goal.
Yep.
How about we change it from a button to a dial? What's it sitting at? It's sitting at 10. If we could get this down to 3 or 4, would you be happier? And then they got on board. And because cognitive behavioural therapy, no therapy, like, this is the thing, like, this is the big lie. Nobody can get rid of it. Aye. This is it.
This is the lesson I've learned in life, is
nobody's going to get rid of it.
It's part of who I am.
It is who you are, and you're here for a reason. And like, you know, all the bits and pieces that I've woke up with, like low self-esteem and self-doubt and self-sabotage, no like taking chances on myself throughout my life. It's because the one time that I did it was a big failure in my mind. It was like this abject failure, and I never want to put myself in that position ever again. That's happening all subconsciously because I want better for myself. I'm like, I want to do these things, but there's something just holding me back. And then the more that cycle goes and goes and goes. But then when you realise, when the light gets shone on it, like, well, why? And it's like, oh, well, I don't like being a failure. Nobody likes being a failure. Big surprise. It's like, right, but this is going to mean that you're less likely. Start using it. See if you're waking up and you're like, oh, I'm worried about this. Do something about it. Don't do what you've done in the past and just let it go. But how to deal with this issue of the big world, right? And this is something that I've never really, I've no used somebody else's technique and there's nothing in the textbook. And I think it's because it's a newer thing for people, like having to consider what impact I mean, why is veganism went through the roof? Why is environmentalism went through? Because people are actually starting to get an awareness of the impact that they personally have on the planet. But when we're dealing with things like George Floyd, and you're dealing with things like sexual assault, Me Too, like these real big fucking issues, and you're asking somebody to scale back the feeling of anxiety when they've been a victim of racism, when they've been a victim of sexual assault, when they don't make a lot of money.
It's an incredibly hard thing to ask somebody to do.
It's impossible. And so they're wasting their time coming to you, really and truly. If you go and do like the psychotherapy and you just endlessly talk about shit, because you're never ever going to get beneath that. Why should I feel good when the rest of the world is such a fucking shithole? Like, like that type of idea. This is my message to them, and Jabemi actually said it fucking perfect. And the only reason that this is my message is because it's the only one that really hits home with people. If you've got a group of like 5 or 6 people that surround you, impact them. And that's it. That's all that you're responsible for. If you want to share the BLM message on your social media, beautiful. If you want to go to the protest, like we've seen in the South Side with the refugees, beautiful. And I love it. And like, more power to you, and I'll be there side by side with you.
Absolutely.
But if you then let that issue become a detractor in your life, you're doing yourself a disservice. Like, you can't do much about Tommy Robinson's army of fans.
Stoning on tanks and shit.
Screaming at people on Twitter's just like screaming into the void. In fact, disengage for that. And what today is make sure that if anybody round about you is engaging in that bullshit, that you interject. And then remind yourself that you're doing enough, because that's all that you can actually do. You're not going to convince people on Twitter to change their mind. Make an actual choice to realise that there is nothing that you can do about that guy. The only thing that you can do is if that's your dad, is have a word with him and try and change his mind. And then if he then goes and changes 5 people round about him, that domino effect that you'll have is just incredible. I had a real think, because it's a challenge when somebody sits in front of you and goes, Paul, look, I don't want to feel better. Well, they don't say that to you, but really what they get at every time you're going, let's try and change that mode of thinking is like, but it's true. You know what I mean? Like, it's true that people are being murdered every day for the colour of their skin.
Definitely.
It is true, but you worrying about that to the point where you can't go and apply for a job or you can't motivate yourself becomes a net detractor in your life. That's when you actually need to go, well, what am I doing here? And what is it that you want to do? I want to change the world. Well, change your world.
Aye.
And then hopefully the world around about you will change along with you.
Aye. I think that's a good sentiment to wrap this one on.